The wind in Montana didn't just move dust that day. It carried shame, heartbreak, and the ghost of a promise that had never been real. Under the blazing sun, a young Apache woman sat on the edge of the Timber Creek stage stop, her braids tangled with sand, her spirit heavy with betrayal. Her name was Awanata, and 3 days ago, she had believed in love. Now, all she believed in was the silence between hoofbeats. The land stretched wide and empty, painted in tones of dust and sorrow. The old stage stop stood like a skeleton of civilization, creaking in the wind that swept across the Montana territory. There, beside 2 worn leather satchels, Awanata waited. Her dark eyes stared at the horizon where no one came. The man who had promised her a future, a white trader named Boone Carter, was supposed to meet her here. He'd said they would ride west together, start a ranch, and build a life where race and blood no longer mattered. She had believed him, foolishly. Now, 3 days had passed, and even the stagecoach driver had stopped asking if she was all right. Inside the station, Doc Avery, the keeper, shifted uncomfortably when he saw her still sitting there each morning. "Ma'am, I can't keep a room on hope," he'd said that morning, his voice half kind, half weary. "You ought to move on before the cold sets in." But where could she go? Her tribe had been scattered after the last raid. The white settlements didn't want her. The army patrols would drive her off if she wandered too close. And the man who swore she was his future had left her to the mercy of the wind. That morning, she stopped pretending he might come. The sunlight caught the silver pendant around her neck. A gift from her mother. Now the last trace of a world long gone. She pressed it between her palms like a prayer she no longer believed in. By afternoon, the horizon shimmered with heat. The land hummed with that strange silence that comes just before something changes. Awanata heard it first. The distant rhythm of hooves. Slow, steady. Not the reckless gallop of a traveler, but the deliberate stride of a man who knew where he was going. She stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. Her heart pounded against her ribs, caught between fear and hope. Maybe it was Boone. Maybe he had come back. Maybe he had a reason. But when the rider came into view, she knew better. The man on the chestnut stallion wasn't Boone Carter. He rode with a kind of quiet purpose, his long coat trailing behind him like a shadow. His face was partly hidden under a weathered hat, but the way he carried himself, calm, steady, unyielding, spoke of someone used to danger. The horse slowed, and the man dismounted in one smooth motion. Dust lifted around his boots. His voice was deep, roughened by the road. "You're the Apache girl that man left behind," he said, not as a question, but as a truth already known. Awanata's chin lifted. "That's not your concern." The stranger took off his hat, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. "Maybe not, but Boone Carter is." Her breath caught. "You know him?" He nodded once, his jaw tightening. "Too well." For the first time in days, she felt something other than despair. Curiosity, maybe even anger. "Then tell me where he is." The man studied her for a long moment before answering. "If I knew that, I'd have his hide nailed to the nearest post." He extended a hand, calloused and honest. "Name's Jack Thorne. I've been tracking him for months." The desert wind carried the scent of dry sage and distance. Awanata didn't move. Trust was a dangerous thing out here. But the steadiness in his voice broke through her defenses. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he said simply. "Just don't die waiting for a man who's never coming." The world seemed to pause. Somewhere, a hawk cried out overhead, and the wind shifted. The stage stop, Once her prison of waiting, now felt like the edge of a choice. Awanata looked at the horizon one last time, then back at the man whose words cut sharper than any blade. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. The red dust rose like smoke across the plain that afternoon, turning the Montana sky the color of old whiskey. Awanata shielded her eyes as the rider came closer. A man cut from the land itself. Broad-shouldered, tall in the saddle, moving with the ease of someone who had outlived too many storms. When he stopped a few yards from her, the silence fell heavy between them. His horse snorted, pawing the dirt. The man's eyes, steel gray with hints of blue, met hers. They carried the kind of weariness that only comes from seeing the world take more than it ever gives back. He tipped his hat slightly. "You the one been sitting here 3 days?" Awanata didn't answer. Her voice had been silent so long it felt foreign now. The stranger dismounted, boots landing firm in the dust. Up close, he smelled of leather, trail smoke, and the faint bite of gun oil. His duster coat was sun-faded, his revolver well-worn. Everything about him said he wasn't a man who made small talk. "I heard about what happened," he said finally. "Boone Carter left you high and dry." Her heart jerked at the name, but she kept her face steady. "You don't know what you're talking about." He studied her quietly, as if weighing whether the truth would break her or set her free. "Maybe not," he said. "But I know Boone Carter. Known him long enough to smell his lies from half a territory away." Awanata frowned. "What do you want from me?" "Not a damn thing," he said, his tone low, calm. "Name's Jack Thorne. I've been tracking Boone for the Pinkertons. He's wanted in 3 territories for swindling women out of their savings and vanishing before sunrise." She blinked. "The Pinkertons?" "Yeah, they hired me after he conned one woman too many." His jaw tightened. "That woman was my sister." The wind tugged at her braids, carrying the smell of the desert. She searched his face, and for the first time saw something beneath the stoic exterior, a scar deep enough to never heal. "What happened to her?" Jack looked past her, toward the endless stretch of horizon. "Mary Thorne. She was young, kind, too trusting. Boone spun her a web of gold and promises, took every cent she had and left her to starve in a town that didn't care. By the time I found her, she was already gone." He said it like he was carving each word into stone. Awanata felt the weight of his loss, different from her own, yet carved from the same sorrow. "So you're hunting him. Been riding on his trail for near a year. He's clever, slippery, changes names, grows a beard, tells a new story each town. By the time folks realize who he is, he's long gone." She folded her arms, her pride stiffening her spine. "Then you came here thinking I was one of his fools." Jack's gaze softened, though his voice stayed firm. "No, ma'am. I came 'cause you're still breathing. That means you got a chance to start again. My sister didn't." That stung worse than pity. It was truth, raw and unvarnished. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the lost Apache woman and the weary cowboy bound by a ghost they both wanted to bury. Jack pulled something from his coat, a crumpled wanted poster. He held it out to her. Boone Carter's sketch stared back. The sharp jawline, the smirk she once thought charming. Beneath it, the words, "Wanted for fraud, extortion, and grand theft." The sight hit her like a punch. "He told me he had land, a ranch near the Bitterroots. He said he needed help to buy cattle." Jack nodded grimly. "Same story every time. He don't need cattle. He needs victims." Awanata felt her knees weaken, but she refused to fall. "Then he'll pay," she said quietly. "For me. For your sister." Jack's eyes flickered. Surprise, maybe even respect. "You talk like someone who's seen blood." "I've seen enough," she replied, her tone as dry as the dust around them. The corner of his mouth twitched, just barely. "Good. You'll need that fire where we're headed." She hesitated. "Where's that?" "North, toward the mountains. I got a place there, Quinn Ranch. You'll be safe till I figure out which way Boone ran." Awanata's pride flared again. "I don't need savin'." He adjusted his hat. "Didn't say you did, but every hunter needs a place to start." The wind gusted, stirring the red dust between them. The sun dipped low, setting the sky ablaze. Awanata looked at the stranger, the man who spoke little but carried truth like a blade. And for the first time in days, she felt the faint tremor of purpose returning. Jack Thorne mounted his horse and looked down at her. "You comin' or not?" Her gaze followed the road that vanished into the mountains, then back to the empty stage stop behind her. She gathered her satchels, tied her braids tight, and climbed onto the spare horse. "All right," she said softly. "But I ride for myself." Jack gave a slow nod. "That's the only way worth riding." And as they rode west, the dying sun painted their shadows long against the earth. Two souls, both betrayed by the same man, heading into the kind of story the West never forgets. The sun was sliding behind the ridges when Jack Thorne turned in his saddle, dust swirling around his boots. Awanata stood by the porch rail of the Timber Creek stage stop, her eyes sharp and unreadable. Behind her, the old building leaned against the wind, and ahead, nothing but 100 miles of wilderness and choices that could kill a soul either way. Jack dismounted, his spurs clinking softly. "You stay here, you'll die slow," he said, voice steady, like someone who'd watched that happen before. "This land don't take pity, not on anyone." Awanata's chin lifted, proud and unbroken despite the tremor in her voice. "And if I go with you?" Jack's gaze met hers. "Then at least you'll be riding towards something, not waiting for nothing." For a long moment, the wind howled between them. Then, with a low sigh, Awanata nodded once, like someone signing a pact with fate. Jack extended a hand. "No one deserves to die waiting for someone who ain't comin'." His hand was calloused, rough from years of labor and gunfights, yet steady. She hesitated, then took it. That simple gesture, skin meeting skin, felt like the beginning of something neither of them had words for. They rode until the daylight thinned into copper. The road turned wild past the canyon edge, cutting through patches of dry sagebrush and scattered pines. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was the kind that spoke for people who'd seen enough of life's noise. As the stars began to show, Jack pulled his horse to a stop beside a narrow creek. "We'll camp here. Water's clean enough." Awanata slid off her horse, her muscles aching from hours of riding. She crouched by the stream, washing the dust from her face. The cold bit her skin, but it felt good. Real. She could almost forget she'd been left for dead just a day ago. Jack knelt nearby, striking flint to kindling until a small fire caught. Its light flickered over his face. Strong jaw, weary eyes. A man who carried more ghosts than bullets. He handed her a piece of dried jerky. "Ain't much, but it's honest food." She took it silently. For a while, they ate without words, just the sound of the creek and the crackle of flame. "You said you're Apache," Jack finally spoke, voice low. "How'd you end up at Timber Creek?" Awanata stared into the fire. The flames danced in her eyes like memories she didn't want to face. Soldiers came through our valley last winter. Said we had to move to the reservation. My father refused. They shot him first. My mother..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I ran. I kept running." Jack didn't interrupt. His jaw clenched, but his eyes softened with something close to respect. "They took everything from you." "They didn't take who I am," she said, voice hardening. "That's the one thing I keep." Jack nodded slowly. "That's something most folks forget to hold on to." She turned the question on him. "And you? You lost someone too." He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the dark. "My sister Mary. She believed in Boone Carter same way you did. Thought love could make a good man out of bad. She was wrong." Awanata studied him. "So this is revenge?" Jack looked up, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "Started that way. But now, I reckon it's about justice. Maybe if I catch him, she can rest easier." "Justice," Awanata murmured. "That's just revenge with better manners." He gave a small, rough laugh. "You talk like someone who's seen too much to be young." "I grew up fast," she replied. "The desert don't wait for anyone to learn slow." They shared a quiet smile across the fire, a fragile bridge in a hard world. When the night deepened, the wind carried the scent of rain. Jack stood, tightening the horse's reins. "You should rest. We'll ride early. Ranch is a day's ride from here." Awanata pulled her blanket tighter. "Why'd you offer to take me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've seen what this land does to people left behind, and I ain't leaving another soul to die if I can help it." She didn't thank him. Not yet. Gratitude wasn't easy for someone who'd survived by trusting no one. But when she lay down beneath the wide Montana sky, the stars above her looked less like strangers and more like witnesses. Across the fire, Jack sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes half closed but still alert. The flame cast gold across the dust on his boots, and for the first time since her life had burned to ashes, Awanata felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Not safety, not trust, hope. And in the West, hope was rarer than rain. By the time they rode into Quinn Ranch, the sky had turned the color of cold iron. Snow streaked the mountaintops in the distance, and a thin layer of frost kissed the tall grass that bent under the wind. The ranch spread wide across the valley, wooden fences, a big barn with smoke curling from the chimney, and the faint smell of hay and horses. To most, it was just another piece of land carved out of wilderness. To Awanata, it looked like the first place that might let her breathe again. Jack reined in his horse by the front porch and swung down. "Welcome to your new start," he said, voice dry as dust. Awanata dismounted carefully, her legs stiff from the long ride. A brown and white shepherd dog came trotting toward her, Ranger, his tail wagging, his eyes bright with curiosity. He sniffed her hand, then barked once, sharp and approving. "That's a first," Jack muttered, amused. "Ranger don't take kindly to strangers." "Maybe he knows I ain't one," Awanata said quietly, scratching the dog behind his ear. From the porch came the clatter of a pot lid, and the unmistakable sound of a woman's voice, sharp as a hawk. "Jack Thorne, if you dragged another lost soul here for me to feed, I swear—" Millie Collins appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was tied back tight, and her expression could curdle milk. But when she saw Awanata, something in her face softened, just a flicker, quickly hidden. "This her?" Millie asked. Jack nodded. "She's staying here till things settle." Millie folded her arms. "Apache girl, huh? You sure you ain't looking for more trouble than you can handle?" Awanata met her gaze head on. "If you got a problem with me, Say it plain." Millie's brow lifted, a smirk forming. "Lord, she's got fire. Maybe she'll last longer than the last one you brought." That night, the ranch house smelled of stew and wood smoke. Awanata ate slowly, unused to warmth and walls. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, but inside there was a strange peace. Jack kept mostly quiet, only speaking when necessary, while Millie filled the silence with stories of hard winters and stubborn men. Days turned into weeks. Awanata found herself rising before dawn, helping Buck Riley, the ranch foreman, count cattle, repair fences, and stack hay. Buck was a man of few words, rough around the edges but fair. At first he kept his distance, but when he saw her haul feed sacks heavier than most men could lift, he grinned through his mustache. "You're a quiet storm, girl," he said. "Don't make a fuss, just roll through and change the whole damn sky." The name stuck. She learned quickly. Millie showed her how to keep the books and stretch rations through the long winters. Buck taught her how to ride bareback, how to read the weather from the way the wind curled off the peaks. Jack, when he wasn't off chasing leads on Boone Carter, taught her how to shoot straight, though she preferred the bow she'd made herself. Even Ranger, who once shadowed only Jack, started following her through the fields, his ears perked and tail swaying. At night, he'd rest by her feet by the hearth, his steady breathing a comfort she hadn't known she needed. But life at Quinn Ranch wasn't all peace. The locals of Silver Ridge didn't take kindly to the idea of an Apache woman living under a white man's roof. Sometimes, when Awanata went to town for supplies, whispers trailed behind her like burrs. "That Thorne fella's lost his damn mind. She'll rob him blind soon enough." She ignored them. Words were lighter than bullets, and she dodged plenty of both. One evening, as the sun burned low behind the mountains, she stood outside the barn, watching the sky bleed orange into violet. Jack rode in, dust on his coat, a shadow in his eyes. "Another dead end?" she asked. He nodded. "Boone's getting good at disappearing." She didn't say she knew that feeling well, the art of vanishing, the weight of being unseen. Instead, she said, "You'll find him." He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, something like gratitude flickered there. "Maybe," he murmured, "if I don't lose myself first." The words hung between them, soft but heavy. Later that night, as Awanata sat by the window, she watched the snow start to fall. Gentle and slow, the ranch, for all its rough edges and ghosts, had begun to feel like a kind of home, a fragile piece carved out of wilderness. And though she wouldn't admit it yet, part of her prayed that Jack Thorne, the man who carried too much sorrow in his silence, might someday find that peace too. Because for the first time in her life, Awanata wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live. The fire cracked softly, sending thin ribbons of smoke into the black Montana sky. Coyotes howled somewhere out past the ridge, their cries echoing through the cold air. Awanata sat cross-legged by the flames, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Across from her, Jack Thorne sat quiet, turning his tin cup in his hands, the firelight carving hard lines into his face. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hiss of wood and the steady breathing of Ranger, the dog curled between them. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "My sister's name was Mary Thorne." His voice came slow, rough, like he was pulling each word from a wound that hadn't healed right. She was sweet, too sweet for this world, thought everyone meant what they said. Then Boone Carter showed up, smooth talk, city charm, all dressed like a gentleman. Promised her a life out west, same way he promised you. Awanata didn't move. The flames danced in her dark eyes, but she didn't look away. Jack's jaw flexed. He took every dime she had. When I found her, she was in a mining town outside Cheyenne. She'd been sick, hungry. Folks said she just sat on the porch every day waiting for him to come back. He never did. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the still night. I buried her myself. Didn't have a preacher, so I said what I could. Swore I'd find the bastard who did it and make him answer for it. The wind shifted, scattering sparks. The glow from the fire painted Jack's face in amber and shadow, like two men were fighting for control inside him. The lawman and the brother. Awanata's voice, when it came, was low but steady. You hunt him because of guilt. Jack looked up sharply, his gray eyes narrowing. She didn't flinch. You think catching him will wash away what you couldn't stop, but it won't. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And what would you know about it? She held his gaze, unshaken. More than you think. You chase ghosts. I've buried mine. For a heartbeat, anger flickered across his face. Then it faded, replaced by something heavier, understanding. Then why would you hunt him? Because some things deserve justice, she said simply. Not for what they took from us, but for what they keep taking from others. The words settled between them like embers, glowing, alive. Jack studied her in silence. The woman sitting across the fire wasn't the lost girl he'd met at Timber Creek. The desert hadn't beaten her, it had tempered her. You talk like you've seen too much for your years, he said finally. I have, she replied. Out here, people like me don't get to grow old without scars. Jack nodded slowly, then poured what was left of his coffee into the dirt. I used to think the West was where a man could start over. Now I reckon it's just where the truth comes looking for you. Awanata's lips curved faintly. Truth's got long legs. It always catches up. He smiled at that, a rare, quiet thing. For a moment, the hard lines of his face softened, and she caught a glimpse of the man beneath the badge and bitterness, a man who once laughed easy, loved deep, and lost too much. Ranger stirred, his ears twitching toward the sound of wind rustling through the sagebrush. Jack reached out, absently scratching behind the dog's neck. Tomorrow I'll ride into Helena, he said. Pinkerton wires said Boone's been sighted near the rail line. Could be a lead. You'll go alone? She asked. I always have. Awanata looked into the fire, the flames throwing gold into her eyes. You shouldn't. No one should face their ghosts alone. Jack's expression shifted. A trace of surprise, maybe even gratitude. You offering to ride with me? She shrugged. Maybe. Depends if you can keep up. He laughed, a rough, tired sound that still managed to feel human. You got grit, I'll give you that. I've got reason, she said. The fire crackled between them, and for the first time since they'd met, Jack Thorne didn't see an abandoned girl. He saw an equal, someone carved by pain but not broken by it. When the night grew colder, they sat in silence again, side by side under a sky crowded with stars. Neither spoke, but something unspoken settled deep. A bond forged not from mercy, but from shared scars, and a hunger for justice that ran bone deep. And as the last log broke apart in the fire, Jack knew this much for certain. If Boone Carter thought he could keep running, he hadn't met the kind of storm that was now riding with him. The wind carried the scent of snow that morning when Jack Thorne saddled his horse. The mountain stood sharp and gray on the horizon, and the sky had that pale, unforgiving hue that promised a storm before sundown. Awanata stood by the corral fence, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. Jack swung up into the saddle, the leather creaking under his weight. Helena's just 3 days if the weather holds, he said. She looked at him, her dark eyes steady. And if it doesn't? He gave her that half smile, the kind that looked brave on the outside, but carried 100 unspoken fears underneath. Then I'll make it 4. The trail to Helena was no place for mercy. He'd gotten word that Clyde Boone, a slick-tongued banker with a grin too wide to trust, had been holding the stolen deposits that Boone Carter never got to claim. If Jack could recover them, it'd be enough to clear the ranch's debts and bury Boone's shadow for good. Awanata didn't try to stop him. She knew better than most that some rides a man had to take alone. Still, when Ranger barked and followed Jack a few steps down the trail, she felt her throat tighten. "Go on, Ranger," Jack called softly. "Stay and look after her." The dog obeyed, but his ears stayed perked toward the disappearing rider until Jack vanished beyond the ridge. The days that followed turned Quinn Ranch into a proving ground. With Jack gone, every eye shifted to Awanata, some doubtful, some curious, most waiting for her to fail. Buck Riley, the foreman, tested her first. "Fence down by the North Creek," he told her that morning. "Takes a good pair of hands to fix it." "Then I'll need 4, she said flatly, grabbing a hammer and rope. By sundown, she'd not only patched the fence, but managed to calm a spooked colt that had nearly broken Jed Skinner's leg. Her hands bled from the wire, but she didn't flinch. Dusty Miles spat a stream of tobacco and shook his head. "She ain't just stubborn, she's got grit." Buck chuckled. "That's one way to say it. Quiet storm, that one." From that day, the name stuck. The Quiet Storm. Awanata took over the ledgers Millie Collins used to keep, balancing feed costs and payroll. She rode the pastures at dawn, checked water lines, and mended tack by lantern light. When a calf went missing, she and Ranger tracked it through snow and brush until they found it shivering by the creek bed. She carried it home herself, its weight pressing hard against her back. But she didn't stop once. The ranch hands began tipping their hats when she passed, not out of politeness, but out of respect. Evenings were the hardest. After supper, when the lamps dimmed and the laughter from the bunkhouse faded, Awanata would step out to the porch. The prairie was a sea of silver under the moonlight, and the wind whispered across the grass like voices too far to understand. She'd wrap her shawl tighter and stare toward the north, toward Helena. Sometimes she thought she could almost hear the distant clang of hammers and the hiss of the railroad engines, the sounds of men like Jack riding into danger with nothing but their convictions to keep them warm. Millie Collins often found her there. "You'll wear holes in that porch, staring so hard," the old woman teased gently. Awanata smiled faintly. "If I stop looking, I'll stop believing." Millie handed her a cup of coffee and patted her arm. "He's got too much stubborn to die, child. Trust me, I've known that man long enough to say it." But the wind carried a chill that night that coffee couldn't fight. 3 weeks passed. Letters from Helena were few and short, just a line or two in Jack's rough handwriting. "Found Clyde. Meeting tomorrow." Then silence. Each dawn after that, Awanata woke before the rooster, hoping for a rider cresting the ridge. Each night, she stood on that porch, the lantern beside her burning low, listening to the wind scrape against the empty hills. Ranger sat by her feet, ears twitching, as if he too waited for a sound that never came. Once, Buck caught her standing there, eyes fixed on the horizon. "He'll come back," he said quietly. "Men like Jack always do." Awanata didn't answer. The wind blew her hair across her face, and she whispered something only the prairie could hear. Because in her heart, she knew the truth the West always taught too well. That hope was a fragile thing, easily carried off by the wind. Still, every night she stood there, waiting, the lantern light flickering against the cold Montana dark. And somewhere out there, between the mountains and the dust, the storm she feared was already riding back toward her. The telegram came at dawn. Millie Collins was the one who read it, her hands trembling as she handed it to Awanata. The words were short, like all bad news. Jack Thorne, wounded. Helena. Boone Carter, captured. Awanata stared at the slip of paper, the ink bleeding slightly where Millie's tears had fallen. The morning light outside Quinn Ranch looked different that day. Gray, thin, and cruelly quiet. By the time Buck Riley saddled the horses, she was already at the gate. "You don't have to go," Buck said. "He'll make it. Man like Jack, he's too damn stubborn to die." She didn't answer. She just mounted up, her braid whipping behind her like a black banner. Ranger trotted alongside as she rode, his paws kicking dust across the cold ground. The road to Helena stretched wide and lonesome, but she didn't feel the distance. She felt only the pull in her chest, sharp as a knife, fear and something deeper, something she hadn't dared to name. Helena was still half asleep when she arrived. The air smelled of smoke and iron. Outside the sheriff's office, 2 horses stood tethered, their flanks caked in mud. The sound of a door creaking open drew her attention. Clyde Boone, the bank manager, stepped out with his vest crooked and his spectacles fogged. "You're the woman from Thorne's ranch?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded toward the room inside. "He's in bad shape. Took a bullet through the shoulder. Lost some blood, but the doc says he'll pull through. As for Boone Carter..." His voice dropped. "He's alive. Barely. Sheriff's got him locked up till the Pinkertons come." Awanata walked past him without a word. Inside, the room was heavy with the smell of whiskey and gunpowder. Jack lay on a cot, pale beneath the grime and bandages, but his eyes flicked open the second she stepped in. "You came," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. She moved closer, kneeling beside him. "You caught him." His lips twitched into something like a smile. "Red Davis and Deke Bowen were with him. Put up one hell of a fight, but Boone's done. He won't hurt anyone else." Awanata brushed the dust from his coat, careful around the wound. "You're lucky you didn't die." "Luck had nothing to do with it," he murmured. "Had a promise to keep." Her throat tightened. "You should rest." He looked at her, and in his gray eyes, she saw the same fire that had kept him alive all this time. "I told you, Awanata," he whispered. "No more waiting." The words hit harder than the gunfire that had nearly killed him. She didn't realize she was crying until he reached out, rough fingers brushing her cheek. Later that evening, Buck arrived to bring them both home. The streets of Helena buzzed with talk. How the infamous Boone Carter had finally been caught. How the man who'd fooled half the territory was now chained in the sheriff's cellar. But Awanata barely heard a word. At the edge of town, she helped Jack into the wagon. He winced but said nothing, jaw tight with pain. Ranger jumped up beside him, laying his head across Jack's knee like a sentinel. The ride back to the ranch was slow. The sun set behind them, painting the sky blood red. At one point, Jack dozed off, his head resting against the wooden side. Awanata kept the reins steady, her eyes fixed on the trail. Every now and then, she glanced back at him. This broken, stubborn man who had fought so hard for justice, and somehow ended up fighting for her too. When the ranch came into view, the lamps glowed in the windows like small beacons of mercy. Millie waited by the porch, her apron stained from worry. Buck jumped down first, but Awanata was already at Jack's side. He tried to swing his leg over, failed, and laughed weakly. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered. "Ain't the first time I've been shot." "Maybe not," she said softly, steadying him, "but it better be the last." As she helped him down, his weight pressed briefly against her. He smelled of smoke and dust and the sharp tang of iron. "You came back," she whispered. He met her eyes, smiling through the pain. "Told you," he said, voice barely a breath. "No more waitin'." That night, as Millie tended to his wounds and the ranch grew still, Awanata stepped outside. The wind was cold, but for the first time it didn't feel lonely. Somewhere behind her, she heard Jack's quiet laugh echo through the hall. The man who'd gone chasing ghosts had returned home. Not whole, but alive. And the woman who once believed she had no home at all found one standing right there, waiting for her in the fading light of Montana. Winter clung to the Montana Valley like a stubborn ghost. Snow glazed the fences of Quinn Ranch, and every sunrise painted the plains in silver and silence. Inside the ranch house, Jack Thorne was healing slower than he liked. His shoulder still burned from the bullet Boone Carter's hired gun had planted there, but pain never stopped a man like him. It only reminded him he was still alive. Awanata checked his bandage that morning, her touch gentle yet certain. "You moved too soon," she said. Jack smirked. "You sound like Millie." From the kitchen, Millie Collins shouted, "She's the only one in this house who listens, that's why?" Awanata almost smiled. Almost. The woman had grown fond of her in her own gruff way, teaching her to bake cornbread, mend torn shirts, and argue like a proper Westerner. Still, Awanata kept her heart guarded. She had learned long ago that nothing kind lasted forever. Jack watched her carefully, his gray eyes tracing the quiet grace in her movements. "You've done more for this ranch than I ever could," he said. "I just worked," she replied. "No," he said, his voice firm. "You gave it life again." Awanata looked up, unsure how to answer. There was something in his tone, something that scared her more than the desert or any gunfight ever could. That evening, the fire crackled in the hearth, throwing warm light over the room. Outside, snow fell in slow, quiet sheets. Jack stood by the window, his silhouette tall against the glass. "I've been thinking," he said finally. Awanata turned from the table. "That sounds dangerous." He chuckled, then faced her. "This land, it ain't worth a damn if I gotta ride it alone." Her chest tightened. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it 'cause I have to." He took a slow step closer. "You kept me alive, Awanata. Not just my hide, but the part that gave up a long time ago." She looked away, her pulse quickening. "You don't know what you're asking for." "I know exactly what I'm asking for," he said, his voice low and steady. "I don't want you as a hired hand. I want you as my partner, in every damn sense of the word." Her throat went dry. Partner. The word carried more weight than she was ready for. "You think the folks in Silver Ridge will let you marry an Apache woman?" she asked bitterly. "You think they'll come to our table, shake our hands?" "I don't give a damn what they do," he said simply. "I've lived my life worrying what others think. It's about time I start living for something true." For a moment, the fire popped, and silence swallowed the room. Awanata's eyes glistened, not from weakness, but from the storm she was holding back. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, "to walk into town and have every eye watching you like you don't belong." Jack stepped closer, his voice soft but unyielding. "Then let 'em watch. I'll walk beside you." She met his gaze, searching for the lie, but found none. His face was rough, scarred, tired, but honest. He didn't promise her paradise, he promised her truth, and truth, out here in the West, was rarer than gold. She took a slow breath. You'd have to court me proper, you know. Millie says that's the rule. From the kitchen came Millie's laugh, sharp and delighted. About damn time someone around here's got sense. Jack grinned, tipping his hat. Then I reckon I'll start tomorrow. Don't suppose you like wildflowers? I like ones that survive the frost, she said. Then that's the kind I'll find. Over the next week, he kept his word. He rode into the hills every morning despite the snow, bringing back whatever flowers the cold hadn't killed. Sometimes it was only sagebrush, sometimes a sprig of winter wheat, but each one came with that same crooked smile that somehow thawed something inside her. By the time the snows began to melt, Millie was humming around the house like a woman half her age, teasing them both mercilessly. One night, as the lamps dimmed, Jack found Awanata standing on the porch, the stars burning cold above them. He stepped beside her, not touching, just close enough that their shoulders brushed. Still think I can't court you proper? He asked. She smiled faintly, her breath misting in the night air. You're learnin', and under that vast Montana sky, where every star seemed to whisper old secrets, Awanata let herself believe, just a little, that maybe love, like the land, could be hard, wild, and still worth every fight to keep. Christmas morning dawned over Silver Ridge in a blanket of snow so white it looked like heaven had forgotten to close its door. The town church, small, wooden, and proud, stood at the center of it all, its bell chiming across the frozen valley. By noon, every bench inside was filled. Cowboys who'd ridden in from miles away stamped the frost off their boots. Ranch wives whispered behind gloved hands. Children pressed close to the windows just to catch the falling flakes. But no one spoke louder than Millie Collins, bustling up the aisle, waving her handkerchief at everyone who dared look idle. Lord help me, she muttered. If that preacher starts before I find my seat, I'll haunt this place till Easter. At the front of the church, Jack Thorne stood straighter than any man had a right to after the year he'd had. The bullet wound in his shoulder had long healed, but he still wore the black coat that hid the scar, a quiet badge of survival. He tugged at his collar, uneasy, and shot a look at Buck Riley, who grinned from ear to ear. You sure about this, boss? Buck teased. Jack's lips twitched. Reckon I'm more sure about this than anything I've ever done. The church door creaked open then, and the whole crowd fell silent. A hush swept through the room, like a tide pulling back from shore. Standing in the doorway was Awanata. She wore no silk, no lace, just a dress the color of desert sand, with beadwork stitched along the hem by her own hands. Her dark hair was braided with a single white feather, a tribute to the family she'd lost, and the new one she was walking toward. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass caught on her copper skin, turning her into something holy, half wild, half free, and entirely beautiful. Buck Riley stepped forward, offering his arm. Ready, ma'am? Awanata nodded. I was born ready. As they walked the aisle, the wooden floor creaked beneath their boots, and a soft murmur rippled through the crowd. No one had ever seen anything like it in Silver Ridge. A white man marrying an Apache woman in front of God and everyone. Some whispered disapproval. Others simply watched in quiet awe. At the altar, Reverend Clay smiled kindly, his weathered Bible open in his hands. We are gathered here today, he began, to witness a union not bound by blood or tribe, but by choice, a promise made not in comfort, but in courage. Jack reached for Awanata's hands. His touch was steady, warm. You sure about this, cowboy? She teased softly, her lips curving. He grinned. Ain't nothing in this world I've ever been surer of. The Reverend spoke of faith, of forgiveness, of two souls finding one another in a land that tried hard to make people forget how to hope. When he asked for vows, Jack's voice came out rough but clear. "This land's given me scars and dust," he said, looking into her eyes. "But you gave me back my reason to ride. No matter what tomorrow brings, I swear there'll be no more waiting." The words hit her like sunlight through storm clouds. Her breath caught, and the world narrowed until it was just him, the man who had walked through hell to stand beside her. Awanata's reply was soft, but it carried through the church. "You saved me from a life of ghosts, so I give you this, my heart, my name, and the promise that I'll walk beside you, no matter how rough the trail." The Reverend smiled, closing the Bible. "Then, by the grace of God and the law of Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jack slid the ring onto her finger, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. He leaned close, whispering so only she could hear. "No more waiting, my love." And when he kissed her, the church erupted in applause and laughter. Millie Collins cried so hard she nearly dropped her handkerchief, and even Buck Riley had to clear his throat before clapping the loudest. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier this time, soft flakes drifting like blessings from the sky. The newlyweds stepped out into the cold, their breath mingling in the winter air. The townsfolk cheered, and somewhere the church bell rang once more, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Awanata looked up at the mountains, their peaks lost in cloud. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was caught between two worlds. She belonged to herself, to him, to the land that had taken and finally given back. Jack squeezed her hand, smiling. "Let's go home, Mrs. Thorne." She laughed, her voice clear as the mountain air. "Home," she said, tasting the word like a new beginning. And as they rode back toward Quinn Ranch, the trail behind them disappeared under the falling snow, like all the pain, all the waiting, had finally been buried for good. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came like forgiveness. The snow melted from the ridges, spilling into the lowlands and waking the earth beneath. The fields around Quinn Ranch, once brown and brittle, burst alive with wildflowers, blue lupine, prairie gold, and purple aster swaying in the wind. The air smelled of rain and rebirth. Inside the small ranch house, Awanata Thorne held a newborn girl against her chest. Lily Thorne, tiny and fierce, had her father's gray eyes and her mother's raven-black hair. When she cried, it wasn't delicate. It was loud, strong, the kind of cry that could shake the dust from the rafters. "Got her lungs from you," Jack Thorne said with a grin, standing in the doorway. Awanata looked up from the cradle, exhaustion and pride mingling in her smile. "And her stubbornness from you." He walked closer, brushing a hand over the baby's soft hair. For a man who'd faced bullets and betrayal, Jack looked almost shy. "Didn't think I'd live long enough to see this," he murmured. "Guess the West had other plans," she said. Outside, the sound of laughter echoed from the barn. Buck Riley and the ranch hands, Jed Skinner, Ray Doyle, and Dusty Miles, were fixing the north fence, arguing about who worked hardest. The ranch had grown in the past months, not just in size, but in spirit. The once suspicious locals from Silver Ridge now traded freely with Awanata's people. Apache families helped tend cattle, and settlers taught them new ways to grow crops in the harsh soil. There were still moments of tension, sure, but for the first time, the land felt shared instead of stolen. Even Millie Collins, who used to mutter about proper boundaries, had come around. She was in the kitchen now, banging pots and grumbling, "Lord save me, I'm raising a half-Indian angel in this house." but she said it with a smile, her eyes softer than ever. As twilight settled over the valley, Jack stepped outside with Lily cradled in his arms. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant thunder. He looked up at the endless sky, the same sky that had watched him bury his sister, chase a ghost, and find something far greater than revenge. Awanata joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "She'll grow up different," she said quietly. "Not Apache, not white, just free." Jack nodded. "That's all I ever wanted for her. For us." He looked down at his daughter, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of his coat. "We started with dust," he said softly, "and ended with roots." Awanata leaned her head against his shoulder. "No more waiting," she whispered. The wind answered her, rustling through the tall grass like a song. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and Ranger barked once from the porch as if agreeing. Jack wrapped an arm around her, holding his family close beneath the wide Montana sky. For a long while, they said nothing. The stars came out one by one, scattered across the heavens like embers from an old fire. In that stillness, the past finally felt buried. Boone Carter was gone. The scars had healed. And the West, once a place of loss, had become something new, a home hard-won and honest. As the night deepened, the prairie shimmered with the soft hum of life. Coyotes in the distance, crickets in the grass, and the faint heartbeat of a world learning to heal. Awanata looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer, not to any god in particular, but to the land itself, for mercy, for peace, for tomorrow. Jack kissed her hair and whispered, "We made it, darlin'." She smiled, watching Lily's tiny chest rise and fall. "No," she said softly, "we're just beginning." The stars burned brighter, and the camera of memory would have pulled back then, showing the small house tucked in a sea of grass, the fire glowing in its window, and 3 souls at its heart, bound not by blood or vengeance, but by love and the land that finally gave them both a place to belong. And as the night whispered across the plains, one question lingered. In a land built on loss and dust, what does it truly mean to find home?